University professor insults pregnant black student, but her thesis made the entire committee bow. He said it like it was a joke, but no one laughed. Maybe because no one expected a professor to call a pregnant black student a statistical inevitability to her face in a room full of white scholars. The room went still, not out of shock but habit. Silence had long been academia's favorite accomplice. Camille Jenkins didn't flinch. Not when the insult landed, not when a few nervous chuckles tried to resuscitate the room, and not when Professor Hargrove, smug in tenure and tenure's protection, leaned back like he'd dropped wisdom instead of venom. She had learned, far too early, that showing anger gave people permission to ignore what you said next. So she simply looked at him, looked through him. Then she turned back to her laptop and said, evenly, "Shall we continue? Or would you like to discuss your demographic projections further, Professor?" A few heads lifted. That tone. Calm. Cutting. Dangerous. But Professor Hargrove just smiled, that thin, academic smile, the one worn by people who believe their power is permanent. And Camille knew. If she was going to survive this semester, let alone graduate, she had to turn her thesis into a weapon so sharp it bled the truth into places where truth had long been strangled. 3 months earlier, Camille sat in her advisor's office, a cramped little room with too many books and not enough oxygen. "I'm not changing my topic," she said quietly but firmly. Dr. Mei Zhang, who had come up the hard way herself, folded her hands and studied Camille the way a scientist might study a volatile compound. "You do understand what writing about racial bias in predictive policing means, right? Especially with your visibility." Camille looked down at her swollen belly. She was 6 months pregnant. Her hands rested protectively over the curve. "I understand. Better than anyone." Dr. Zhang sighed. "Then you also understand that some people, some professors, are going to see this as an attack, not a thesis." Camille didn't answer, because she did understand. She understood the cost of telling the truth in a place built to protect lies with footnotes and peer review. But this was her story to tell. And she wasn't just writing for a degree. She was writing because one day her daughter would ask what she did when she had the chance to fight back. The backlash started almost immediately. Hargrove, head of the Thesis committee and a decades-long defender of colorblind data science, began his campaign subtly. Requests for more revisions, accusations of emotional bias, questions that dripped with condescension, like, "Is this your interpretation? Or did someone help you?" Camille met each one with data, with logic, with facts so airtight they could have smothered a fire. But even airtight data can't breathe in a room full of closed minds. "You're trying to paint policing as inherently racist," Hargrove said during one particularly tense meeting. "That's a radical claim." "It's not a claim," Camille replied. "It's a finding, supported by over 10 million data points, a dozen peer-reviewed studies, and a growing number of lived experiences." He narrowed his eyes. "And I suppose your experience is the 13th study?" Camille wanted to say yes, that carrying a black body inside a black body gave her all the credentials she needed. But she stayed silent, let the silence sharpen. Then she clicked to the next slide, a predictive heat map that glowed like a wound, and kept going. She worked late every night. Read court documents and machine learning models by the glow of a thrifted desk lamp. Listen to interviews with mothers who had lost sons and engineers who had trained AI to see crime where poverty lived. The more she dug, the more one truth became undeniable. The system was working exactly as it was designed to, and Hargrove was one of its designers. One evening, long past midnight, she felt the baby kick hard against her ribs. She sat back, one hand on her stomach, and whispered, "Almost there, little one. Mama's building a world where they'll have to look you in the eyes." The final review came faster than expected. They scheduled her defense early, claiming calendar conflicts. It was a setup. She walked into the conference room alone, wearing a simple navy dress that stretched gently over her stomach. No armor, no allies, just her voice. The committee sat like judges, 6 white men, 1 Asian woman, Dr. Zhang, and a pending verdict etched in stone. She began. Slide after slide, stat after stat, She dissected predictive policing like a surgeon, clean, clinical, devastating. She showed how the data collected was already biased, how the algorithms reinforced discrimination, and how black neighborhoods were policed more not because of crime but because of history. Then came the final slide. A picture of her unborn child's ultrasound. She let it sit. Then she said, "This is not a statistical risk. This is my daughter. And if your systems see her as a threat before she takes her first breath, then your systems are broken or worse, working just as you intended." Silence. Dr. Zhang looked down, blinking hard. Hargrove cleared his throat. Emotional appeals have no place in scientific research. Camille turned toward him. "Then maybe your science needs a soul." She closed her laptop. The room remained still. No clapping. No thanks. Just the sound of institutional discomfort settling into its chair. They dismissed her. She left without a word. Hours passed. Then a day. Then two. No email. No call. She tried to distract herself. Went to her prenatal appointments. Ate cereal out of the box. Watched reruns of courtroom dramas, whispering objections when they got the law wrong. Finally, on the third day, her phone buzzed. An email. Subject: Thesis defense decision. She opened it with hands that trembled despite everything she had survived. The first word: approved. And below that, in smaller print, a note: your work will be nominated for the university president's research medal. Camille sat down hard. For a long moment, she said nothing, just breathed. Then she laughed, not out of joy, but something deeper, like the sound of a dam breaking. Camille didn't tell anyone right away. She let the approval settle quietly into her chest, like warmth creeping into frozen limbs. She wanted to hold it for herself, just for a moment, before the world tried to twist it, before someone said she only got it because she was pregnant, or black, or brave. Because that was the trap, wasn't it? They called you brave so they wouldn't have to call you right. That evening, she sat alone on the worn-down couch in her tiny off-campus apartment, the city humming faintly through the cracked windows. A half-eaten carton of takeout sat beside her, forgotten. Her thesis, now officially approved, was open on her laptop, but she wasn't reading it anymore. She was thinking about her mother who used to say, "They'll ask you to prove you're worth twice as much, and still call it charity when you win." Camille smiled faintly. "You were right again, Mama." Then she picked up her phone and called her. Her mother cried when she heard the news. "I wish your father could see this," she said between sniffles. "He can," Camille replied. "He's watching, probably already printing it out to mail to the whole block." They both laughed, and for a moment the weight lifted. But even joy had shadows, because with victory came visibility, and with visibility came a target. The very next day, Camille's inbox began to fill. At first, it was simple. Congratulations from classmates, curious questions from undergrads, a kind note from an administrator who admitted to being moved by the final slide. Then came the rest. One email read, "You're poisoning data science with your feelings." Another said, "Keep your woke garbage out of our algorithms." And then one that made her stomach lurch. "You better hope your kid doesn't grow up in one of those neighborhoods you love so much, because the system you're whining about might actually save her life one day." She deleted them, but they didn't disappear. They echoed. She considered telling someone, maybe Dr. Zhang, maybe the university's diversity office. But she knew the script too well. They'd open a case, start an investigation, encourage her to attend a healing circle or write a statement. They'd do everything except hold anyone accountable. So instead, she printed out the worst of the emails and taped them to the wall above her desk. Fuel. The week before the research medal ceremony, Camille received a formal invitation to a campus panel on ethics in AI. It was hosted by the same department that had fought her thesis at every turn. She laughed when she saw the lineup. Professor Hargrove was on it. So was a representative from a major tech firm that had been quietly lobbying against algorithmic transparency bills in 3 states. And then her name, squeezed at the bottom like an afterthought. "Token," she muttered. She almost declined. But then she thought of her daughter. So she replied, confirmed. Looking forward to it. The day of the panel, the auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, reporters, cameras, microphones. Camille walked on stage with the poise of someone who'd already been crucified and resurrected. She wore a simple cream blouse and black pants that stretched gently over her belly. Her hair was in a tight bun, her face calm. Hargrove was already seated. He gave her a stiff nod. She returned it with a smile so neutral it felt like violence. The moderator began. Soft questions at first. Polite nods. Academic hedging. Then came the question. How do we ensure AI systems remain unbiased? Hargrove leaned forward. By removing the human element as much as possible. Bias comes from people. Machines are neutral. Camille raised an eyebrow. Neutrality, she said, is a myth. Machines learn from data, and data is history, and history is not neutral. Murmurs. She continued. When your training data reflects decades of racist policing, your algorithm doesn't clean it, it learns it, perfects it, turns it into math, and then you act like the math makes it true. The moderator blinked. Are you saying we should discard predictive models entirely? I'm saying we should discard the illusion that they're fair. Then she turned to Hargrove and said without flinching, and we should stop pretending that the people defending them don't have something to lose when the truth comes out. Gasped. Hargrove's face went red. But Camille didn't stop. She told them what she'd found. About the datasets, the feedback loops, the arrests that bred more arrests, the tech companies that sold crime forecasting tools to cities already drowning in inequality. And then, she told them about her daughter. How many more children need to be born into systems that see them as problems to be managed instead of people to be protected? She asked. The room went silent. But this time it was a different silence. The kind that comes right before something changes. After the panel, she was mobbed. Students wanted to shake her hand. Journalists wanted quotes. A woman from a civil rights org handed her a card and said, "Call me. We need voices like yours." Even Hargrove's expression had shifted. Not to regret he was too old, too proud for that, but to something more dangerous. Fear. He was losing control of the narrative. And Camille? Camille was just getting started. The day of the medal ceremony arrived under a rare blue sky. She stood at the back of the hall, waiting for her name to be called, her hands gently folded over the curve of her stomach. Her baby kicked again, like it knew what was coming. They called her name. The applause started slow, then built. Louder, fuller. She walked to the stage as the president of the university extended the medal silver, heavy, engraved with her name. As she accepted it, flashbulbs popped. Reporters scribbled. The room shimmered with tension and pride. She took the mic. I'd like to dedicate this to the students who were told to be quiet, to the voices that were labeled angry instead of accurate, to the mothers who buried children our systems failed, and to the daughter I haven't met yet but who I already owe everything to. Thunderous applause. She looked out over the crowd, faculty, students, skeptics, believers, and then she bowed. The way they bowed to her thesis, to her truth, to her fight. Camille left the stage with the medal in hand and a calm resolve in her chest. But as she stepped outside into the afternoon light, she knew this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous. Because when a black woman wins in a system designed to erase her, the system doesn't applaud. It recalibrates. The congratulations came fast and loud, emails from strangers, calls from advocacy groups, even an invitation to speak at a national criminal justice conference. She was featured in a podcast episode titled The Algorithmic Truth Teller. Her inbox, once full of academic coldness and veiled threats, now overflowed with admiration and desperate questions. How did you do it? Can you help us fight back? Can you teach us? She wanted to answer everyone, but she also needed to rest. Camille was 8 months pregnant. Every day brought a new ache in her back, a new tightness in her ribs, a deeper exhaustion that no nap could cure. One night, around 3 a.m., She sat in her kitchen with a glass of warm milk in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling through another wave of messages. And then she found it. A forwarded internal memo from someone in the university administration. Anonymous. No name. Just a subject line. Concern over Camille Jenkins' upcoming research appointments. Her breath caught. She opened it. There are growing concerns that Jenkins' continued visibility may reflect negatively on the university's partnerships with data science firms. It may be prudent to reassess her access to institutional platforms post-graduation. She read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat dressed in policy language and corporate fear. She met with Dr. Zhang the next morning. Dr. Zhang read the memo without a word, then handed it back like it was contaminated. They're scared. Camille nodded. But they're also planning to erase me. They won't succeed. Not now. Not with the attention on you. Camille leaned forward. That's the thing. The attention isn't protection. It's a spotlight. They're just waiting for it to move somewhere else. Zhang hesitated, then said softly, I'll protect your work. I'll fight for it. Camille gave a grateful smile. I know, but I need more than defense. She took a deep breath. I need to build something of my own. Within a month, Camille launched the Ground Truth Initiative, an independent research collective focused on racial justice in algorithmic systems. She used part of her scholarship money, some help from grassroots donors, and the visibility her story had given her. Their first project, an open-source database of biased predictive policing cases, searchable by city, year, and demographic. She recruited students from across the country: data scientists, sociologists, law students, most of them black, brown, or first-gen kids like her. They worked from living rooms, basements, and libraries. No suits, no bureaucracy, just truth. And people started to notice. City councils began reaching out. Local journalists used the database in exposés. A public defender in New Orleans wrote to say, because of your work, a judge threw out algorithmic evidence in one of my cases. Camille read that email 3 times. Then she closed her eyes, smiled, and whispered, one down. But then it happened. 1 week before her due date, she got a call. Unknown number. She answered anyway. A voice. Clipped. Mail urgent. Ms. Jenkins, this is Detective Rhodes with Metro PD. I need to inform you that your name and address were found on a white supremacist forum that's being investigated for making targeted threats. Her chest went tight. What kind of threats? General at this point. But your photo, thesis, and contact info were posted. We're monitoring it closely. I recommend you avoid unnecessary travel and... She hung up before he could finish. Then she locked all her doors and sat on the floor of her living room. One hand on her belly, the other holding her phone like a weapon. She had known this was possible. But knowing and feeling it press against your ribs were different things. Still, she didn't cry. She just sat there, quietly repeating to herself, they're scared, because I'm telling the truth. The next morning, she installed a camera at her front door. Then she emailed her team, her supporters, and even a few reporters. She titled the email, You Should Know. And she wrote, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. It will be backlash. And backlash means we are finally getting close to the wound. Then she hit send and got back to work. Her daughter, Nia Grace Jenkins, was born 3 days later. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Brown skin like molasses. A cry that filled the hospital room like thunder. Camille held her close and whispered, welcome to a world that wanted you gone before you got here. But we're still here. And we're not going anywhere. She spent the next few weeks wrapped in the fog of new motherhood, sleepless nights, diapers, soft lullabies hummed between tears of joy and exhaustion. But even in that fog, the work didn't stop. The world kept calling. By the time Nia was 3 months old, the Ground Truth Initiative had uncovered a new scandal. A predictive crime algorithm used in public housing evictions. It had flagged black families at 5 times the rate of white ones based on historical arrest records, not actual offenses. They published the report. It went viral. Suddenly, Camille was everywhere again. CNN, The Atlantic, TED Talk invite, and then a subpoena. A major tech company was suing her collective for defamation. Camille stared at the legal documents, her hands shaking. They wanted to silence her. With money, with power, with paperwork. But Camille had learned something critical by then. When truth scares power, power will try to make the truth illegal. So she fought. Pro bono lawyers stepped in. Civil rights groups rallied. Even a few professors, ones who had once stayed silent, wrote public letters of support. The case dragged on for 9 months. During that time, Camille continued publishing, speaking, organizing. And when the court finally threw the lawsuit out with a brutal ruling in her favor, the judge's words echoed across headlines. Facts are not defamation. Ms. Jenkins did what our institutions failed to do. Tell the truth. The day that ruling came, Camille held Nia on her hip, opened the news app, and just laughed. Laughed long and hard. 2 years later, Camille stood before the U.S. Senate. She wore a navy blazer. No jewelry, no makeup, just presence. Nia was now a toddler, asleep with her grandmother backstage, unaware her mother was about to shake the bones of a country, still pretending not to know her name. The hearing was called AI, Race, and the Future of Justice. Camille had been invited as an expert witness, though she knew they only used that term when someone was undeniable. Senator Graves, an aging lawmaker from a southern state with a reputation for order, leaned into his mic and said, "Ms. Jenkins, we appreciate your passion, but isn't it dangerous to suggest algorithms are racist? Isn't that anthropomorphizing code?" Camille didn't blink. "I'm not saying code has feelings, Senator. I'm saying it has fingerprints." He frowned. Fingerprints. Every algorithm was written by someone. And those people had data. And that data was gathered by systems that were designed with bias baked in. You don't need a racist programmer to build a racist algorithm. You just need to feed it racist history and pretend the output is objective. There was a hush across the room. Someone behind the senator coughed. Camille continued. When a black child is more likely to be flagged for future crime because their older brother was arrested in a zip code targeted by biased policing, that's not math. That's trauma, recycled as logic. Another senator, this one younger, sharper, leaned in. "So what's the solution, Ms. Jenkins?" Camille smiled, but it wasn't gentle. "You can't fix a system with code. You fix it with courage. You defund the injustice. You demand transparency. You stop letting tech companies treat civil rights as a PR problem." Then she added, voice calm but iron-edged, "And you stop pretending that neutrality means ignoring race. It means confronting it." After that hearing, Camille's name became bigger than ever. She gave lectures across Ivy League schools that once ignored her. She met with the Department of Justice, sat on panels with whistleblowers and coders alike. And still, she kept ground truth running. One day, they received a package, no name, no note, just a hard drive. Inside was a leak, an internal dataset from a private prison contractor that had been using AI to determine parole recommendations. The data showed black inmates were denied parole 42% more often than white inmates, even when risk factors were identical. Camille and her team verified it, documented it, and published it in a report titled, "The Pattern is the Punishment." It exploded. The contractor issued a denial. The state called for an audit. And Camille, calm, unwavering, went on national television and said, "We are not uncovering new problems. We are putting names on old ones." The next day, her office was vandalized. A brick through the window. Spray paint on the wall, traitor. She stood in front of the broken glass, Nia clutching her leg, and told reporters, "If this is the price of truth, I'm still undercharged." But Camille wasn't just fighting, she was building. Ground Truth grew into a full institute. They launched a public fellowship for formerly incarcerated coders, a grant for students researching racial bias in STEM, a hotline for public defenders needing algorithmic experts in trials. They even opened satellite hubs in 3 cities, all in neighborhoods once redlined, once neglected, now lit up with code, care, and courage. One day, as Camille walked through their newest office, a converted library in Detroit, a young intern stopped her. "I read your thesis in high school," she said, eyes wide. "It changed everything. I didn't know people were allowed to fight algorithms. I thought we just had to live with them." Camille smiled. "That's what they wanted you to believe. But we're rewriting the terms now." In her quiet moments, Camille still thought of Hargrove. He had retired quietly, no apology, no statement. Just vanished into the tenure haze. Sometimes she wondered if he watched her rise, if he scowled every time her name trended. But mostly she didn't care, because the system that made Hargrove didn't need one man to survive. It needed silence. And Camille was done being silent. 5 years after her thesis defense, Camille gave a commencement speech at her alma mater. She stood in front of thousands of faculty, students, parents, and held the same medal they once gave her in a thin, obligatory ceremony. She held it up. "This medal means something now, not because of what it is, but because of what I had to survive to get it." The audience was still. Camille looked out at the sea of faces and said, "Some of you will leave here thinking your degree will protect you from injustice. It won't. What protects you is community. What protects you is truth. What protects you is the fire you refuse to put out even when they call you angry, or emotional, or divisive." She paused. "I was told my thesis was too political, that it was too emotional, that it wasn't real science. But the science didn't lie. They did." And then she said the line that would later be etched on plaques, quoted in protests, printed on stickers and shirts. "If you build a system that can't survive the truth, it deserves to burn." The audience stood. Thunderous, unrelenting applause. Some faculty didn't clap, but most did. Later that night, Camille and Nia walked through campus together. Nia was 6 now, bright-eyed, fearless, full of questions. "Mom," she said, "do you still fight the machines?" Camille smiled. "Sometimes. Do they still try to win?" "All the time. Do they ever stop?" Camille paused, then knelt beside her daughter. "No, baby. They don't stop. But neither do we." Nia considered that, then said, "When I grow up, I want to be loud like you." Camille laughed, heart full. "You already are." They walked on, the campus glowing in twilight, the wind brushing past, the echoes of systems trembling just behind them. The end.